Hi guys, so in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 3 of the Ecce Romani textbook, and in this story we're introducing a new type of noun, specifically masculine nouns, or the nouns that end in us. So as we go through this story I'm going to point them out to you and let you kind of see the noun endings in action and help you with translating them. So again, the first thing I'd recommend is you always look at the vocab, so make sure you have it mastered, you've read through, and that you have a good sense of what these words are, or else it's going to be pretty tricky to translate. After you've handled the vocab, you want to make sure that you read the story out loud. Again, reading it out loud lets you hear the words, it lets you practice your pronunciation, and it just gives you another chance to really process and understand the story without having to sit and directly translating it all the time. And that should be something that you're after, the idea of reading Latin as opposed to just translating it. So let's dive into the story. It starts with in pictura est puer Romanus, nomine Marcus, qui in villa rustica habitat. So we have in the picture, there is a puer Romanus, a Roman boy named Marcus, right? And again, puer Romanus is our new type of noun. So puer, boy, ends in R, and Romanus, the adjective Roman, ends in US. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So his name is Marcus, who lives in a villa rustica, right? He lives in the country house. Etiam in pictura est alter puer, nomine Sextus, qui in eadem villa rustica habitat. So also in the picture, there's another boy, an alter puer, nomine Sextus, named Sextus, qui in eadem villa rustica, so in the same country house, right? So who lives in the same country house? The idea here is it's mimicking the language we've seen so far. So in chapters 1 and 2, we were saying there's Roman girls. Now we're dealing with Roman boys. And you want to notice, like I mentioned before, that when you're dealing with boys or masculine nouns, the nouns that end in US, for instance, the adjective also ends in US. So Romana became Romanus in this chapter. Nothing you can't handle, but it's worth noting that when we're talking about boys in this case, we spell the words slightly differently than when we're talking about girls, right? The story continues. Marcus et Sextus sunt amici, right? Marcus and Sextus are friends, right? And again, notice how when we pluralized these two names, the boys, it went to amici with a long I. That's the part of the grammar that we want to understand. So when you have a noun that ends in US, right, the plural version is a long I. So in this case, what you're pluralizing is the word amicus, which means a friend, a masculine friend, right? As opposed to amica, which we saw in previous chapters when we were talking about girls. So the plural form of amicus is amici with a long I, right? Then we continue. Hodie, pueri in horto clamat et rident quod laeti sunt. So hodie means today. The pueri, the boys, are shouting, clamant, and laughing, rident, in the garden, in horto, right? And again, the verb ends in an NT because you're saying they are doing it, right? The boys. Why are they doing this? Quod laeti sunt, because they are, sunt, laeti, happy. And again, laeti with a long I is the plural form of laitos, which is our adjective that means happy. If we were talking about the girls, we would say laitai with an AE. Since we're talking about the boys, it's laiti with a long I. The story continues. Vir quoque est in pictura, nomine Davus, qui est servus. So also in the picture, quoque in pictura est. So also there is in the picture a vir, a man. So you could even translate it, a man also is in the picture. And it's a man named Davus, right? Davis. Now, this character, Davus, is a slave. We have that in the next phrase, qui est servus. So Davus is one of the slaves in our story. And again, we want to process this a little bit. It's a key theme in Ecce Romani. Roman families, if you had any money, right? Even the lower class ones, as long as you had a little bit of money, you would probably have slaves, right? So it's very common to run into slaves in Roman culture. The Romans were very big in the slave trade. They acquired slaves in a variety of ways. The most common one would be warfare, of course, and conquering other people. But Davus is a slave, and he works for the family. So we got to keep that in mind of what his role is in the family and that social status. Okay. Then we continue. In Italia sunt multi servi qui in agris et in vilis rusticis laborant. So in Italy, in Italia, there are many slaves, multi servi. And again, this is the plural form of servus, becomes servi. There are many slaves who work, laborant, in agris, in the fields, and in country houses, in vilis rusticis. This is the plural form of villa rustica. So now we continue, and we have pueri sunt Romani, sed Davus non est Romanus, right? The pueri, the boys, are Roman, but Davus is not Roman, right? And again, it's because he's a slave. And you want to notice all the plurals here, pueri and Romani, right? The long I, and the nouns that end in us, Davos, along with its adjective, Romanus, right? These are the new endings that we're paying attention to. So then you have est vir Britannicus. That means he is a British man, right? A man from Britain. Qui jam in Italia labora, right? So he's a British man who now works in Italy. So this is one of those lines that I don't particularly love about Ecce Romani, just as a cultural side note. It makes it sound like he, sort of came to Italy to work. That's not really what's happening. He's a slave, so he would have been forcefully taken to Italy. So I think this is sort of an odd line, an odd phrasing from Ecce Romani, but we'll take it for what it is. He's now working in Italy, is the idea. Right? And then it continues. Sextus et Marcus, quod sunt pueri Romani, non laborant. So Sextus and Marcus, because they are Roman boys, are not working. Now, again, this is another line that I actually have a problem with. The implication here is that Marcus and Sextus don't work because they're Roman boys, which is incorrect. The reason they don't work is because Marcus, his father, is a senator, right? So they're a wealthy family is the idea. I know you're going to read later on who Sextus is. He's a friend, basically. But the Cornelius family is very wealthy. They're the family of a senator. So the implication here is that no Roman boys work. Not correct. They definitely would if you were in a lower social class. So this is sort of an oddly worded line. But the idea is that Marcus and Sextus don't work because they're wealthy Roman boys, right? And their family has slaves. So if you take it for what it is, the idea is that they're not going to be working, which would be pretty standard. If you're a wealthy Roman boy, you're not going to be working in the fields. You're going to be becoming educated, hopefully, as we see, and doing other things. So that's kind of the gist of this line. But literally it says Sextus and Marcus, because they are Roman boys, do not work. And again, Sextus and Marcus becomes pueri Romani, right? Roman boys. So it's all matching together. Then it continues. Davos solus laborat, iratus quod pueri clamant et in horto current. So Davos, right? He works alone. Solus laborat, right? He's working by himself is the idea. And notice how solus is matching with Davos. They both have the US ending. And he's angry, iratus, because the boys, the pueri, are clamant, right? They're shouting, and current, running in the garden. So when he's trying to work, they're running around shouting, which is annoying him is the idea. So he's iratus, right? He's angry. Subito, and again, subito means suddenly. It's whenever this shows up, it means there's a change in the action. So subito, statua in piscinam cadet. So a statue falls into the fish pond, right? Statua is a feminine noun here, a noun that ends in A, right? But it falls into the fish pond. It's singular, which is why cadet ends in a T. Sextus ridet, Sextus laughs. Marcus quoque ridet, so Marcus also laughs or is laughing. Sed Davos clamat abite molesti, right? So said Davos, he shouts, go away, pests, right? Molesti comes from the adjective molestus. It means annoying, right? In this case, it means annoying ones or annoying boys, right? So he's saying, go away, pests is how the book translated, which works. He says, go away, pests. Et ad piscinam iratus currit. So, and he runs angrily, you could say. Iratus here is an adjective, but it's really kind of functioning as an adverb. So he angrily runs ad piscinam, to the fish pond, right? So he runs towards the fish pond where the boys just knocked the statue. Pueri ex horto current, Davos gemet. So the boys run out of the garden, ex horto, and Davos groans. And again, notice how pueri, plural, has a verb current that ends in an nt, which is also plural, right? So the story itself is pretty straightforward. The main grammatical thing you're after is just understanding this new noun ending, the us. And when we pluralize it, it becomes a long I. Now, another ending that goes with it is the words that end in R, like puer and weir. They're in the same group. So when you see a word like weir, we're going to see it in the next slide in a second, you add a long I to it, it will become weary, and puer would become pueri. But you want to kind of associate that idea of boys or men, we call them masculine nouns. They're going to end in US or potentially R for weir and puer. And when we pluralize them, they go to a long I. So now we can look at the story in a slightly different way with all those endings highlighted. So again, pay attention to how this all works, the US turning to a long I, and you'll see that we're using a lot of these in the story, which is the point, to give you a lot of practice. But now let's try to understand a little bit more about what's happening with the grammar. To do that, you want to think about the singular and plural nouns that we just saw in this chapter. So in chapter 1, we saw that the ending A, like puella, becomes an AE when you pluralize it, puellae. And now we've seen US, like servus, turning to servi with a long I. So a noun ending of US will get replaced by long I when it's plural. Now, the offset of this little subgroup of the US endings is R. And there's two examples we saw in this story, wir and puer. When you have those words, when you pluralize them, you're not replacing the ending. So in other words, the R will stay there. You're adding the long I. So in servus, we replace the US with a long I to make it servi. When you have wir or puer, you don't replace anything. You just add the long I. So wir becomes weary, puer would become pueri. So if you want to pause this, write it in your notes, feel free. Just make sure that you're on the right track and that you've got that grammar down. So now we can look at the whole story. And again, this is an English translation of it. It's pretty much what I just did for you, over the past few minutes. But you want to make sure that you pause the video, go back and try to translate chapter 3 on your own. And if you're coming up with something pretty close to this, again, I always say it doesn't have to be exactly this translation, but as long as you're on the right track, you might change a phrase around here or there or word it slightly differently. It's totally fine. That would be a good indication that you're moving in the right direction. You're understanding how we translate Latin. You're kind of mastering the idea of singular nouns and subjects, the ones that end in A or US or potentially R, like wir and puer. Those singular subjects are going to have singular verbs. So they're going to have verbs that end in T. And now we've seen that we have plural subjects, plural nouns. The A would become an AE, the US would become a long I, and words like wir and puer will add the long I and become weary and pueri. When you see those, they're going to have plural verbs, so verbs that end in NT. So that's the key concept that we keep coming back to in these first few chapters, is making sure that you're understanding that idea of singular versus plural. So again, I would pause the video here, try it on your own, and if you're matching up pretty closely to what I have here, you're on the right track. Another thing I just wanted to bring to your attention because we're talking about it is Roman gardens. It's an interesting cultural unit. I know I teach it to my students in my classroom. You should definitely look it up if you have a chance. Look up gardens. A lot of them we've been able to kind of extract back by looking at what's been preserved in Pompeii. But the cool thing about a lot of Roman gardens is if you had a wealthier family with a villa rustica, for instance, the garden would be on the inside of the house, which is really cool. And it would be surrounded by a colonnaded walkway. And the idea is that the family could walk around, the dining room, the triclinium would be looking at this garden. It brings some fresh air into the house. And it's a way of bringing nature into your home, which is really, really cool. So it doesn't specify in Ecce Romani if that's what's happening in our story, but I like to at least envision that the family potentially has a little fish pond, a piscina with a statue inside the house in an open air garden like this. And that's what's going on when Marcus and Sextus knock it over. You could also envision it being outside. It kind of depends on what world you want to live in. But in a lot of Roman houses, especially the villas out in the countryside, you would see something like this, or even something like this. Here's another sort of animation, a reconstruction of it. The garden being sort of on the inside of the house and the focal point of the house that everything else launches from. So again, it's just a cool little cultural unit. I'd recommend that you look up Roman gardens if you have a chance. And see some of the reconstructions. We've had some really creative people have done a great job of making videos and reconstructions of what these would look like, and they're definitely worth thinking about. But again, like I always say, you want to envision where the kids would be in this story. Where would Dawes be working? What does a garden look like? That way you can kind of put the story into context, and it'll help you understand it a little bit better. So again, hopefully you found this video useful. If there's any questions you have, feel free to put them into the comments. I'll happily help you out in any way that I can. But again, use this video to try to just make sure you're on the right track. And when you're doing your own translation, if you can match it up against what I just showed you, or if you need an explanation, hopefully you find this video useful. And keep working. Again, the more you practice, the better off you're going to be. And hopefully you won't even need these videos to understand the Latin. But good luck, and I'll see you on the next video.